My sister cleaned out my mother's estate account 2 weeks after the funeral, forged the transfer authorization using my notary stamp, and flew to Cancún with her boyfriend while I was still sorting through Mum's clothes. I thought I had lost everything: the house, the inheritance, my mother's medical debt that was now somehow mine, until my 16-year-old son looked up from his laptop and said, "Mom, I already handled it." 4 days later, my sister called me screaming from a resort lobby because her card had been declined in front of everyone, and the hotel manager was standing there with a printed fraud report that had her name on it. Have you ever been the one who holds everything together, pays the bills, makes the calls, sits in the hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning, while everyone else just shows up for the good parts? Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I genuinely want to know who's out there. My name is Vivian. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-size firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I spend my days tracing money that people think they've hidden. I find numbers that were meant to disappear. It is, in a very specific and painful way, the perfect job for what happened to me last spring. My mother, Patricia, was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's when I was 26, not the slow-moving kind, the aggressive kind that takes your handwriting first, then your balance, then eventually your voice. For 8 years, I was the one who managed her care. I set up the medical trust. I coordinated with her neurologist, Dr. Harmon, every 3 months. I handled the property taxes on her house in Concord, the one she and my father had bought in 1989, the one where my sister and I had grown up. I arranged the in-home aid. I paid for the wheelchair ramp out of my own savings. I did all of this while raising my son Jonah alone, working full-time, and never once asking my sister Renee to split the cost. Renee is 3 years older than me. She lives in Scottsdale, Arizona, with her boyfriend, a man named Troy, who has been between opportunities for most of the decade I've known him. Renee has a gift for being present at exactly the moments that require nothing from her and absent for every moment that does. She flew in for Mom's 65th birthday and stayed 4 days. She called maybe once a month. She sent flowers when Mom had a bad fall in 2022. Nice flowers. That was her contribution. When Mom passed in March, Renee drove up from the airport in a rental car and cried beautifully at the service. She wore a black dress I'd never seen before. She hugged people warmly. She told the story about Mom teaching her to drive on the back roads of Cabarrus County, and half the room was in tears. I stood there watching her perform grief she hadn't earned, and I felt something hollow and very old open up inside my chest. What I did not know, what I would not know for another 9 days, was that 3 hours after the burial, while I was at the house accepting casseroles from Mom's neighbors and signing paperwork with the estate attorney, Renee had driven to a UPS store and used a notarized copy of my signature, one she had taken a photo of from the estate documents I'd emailed her, to authorize a wire transfer from Mom's estate holding account, the account I had set up, the account I managed, the account that held $340,000. The money wasn't just Mom's savings. It was the proceeds from a reverse mortgage she'd taken out 3 years earlier, intended to cover ongoing care costs and eventually to be split between Renee and me after all debts were settled. There was also $47,000 I had personally deposited over the years, documented contributions I had made to cover gaps in her care funding. That money was supposed to come back to me first, per the estate agreement I had drawn up with the attorney. Renee moved all of it, every cent, to a joint account she shared with Troy. I found out on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk at work, reviewing a client file, when I got an automated email alert from the estate account, the kind I'd set up years ago as a routine safeguard. Low balance notification. I assumed it was a billing cycle thing, some automatic payment I'd forgotten to pause after Mom's passing. I opened my banking portal. The estate account showed a balance of $0.17. I sat there looking at the screen for a long time, the kind of stillness that comes before your brain will let you process something. I called the bank. I was on hold for 11 minutes. When I finally got through, the representative read me the transaction log. 1 transfer, the previous Thursday, authorized with a notarized signature, matching my name. The receiving account was flagged as personal, not estate designated. I hung up the phone and went to the restroom and stood over the sink with the cold water running and just breathed. Then I went back to my desk, because I am a forensic accountant and this was, at its core, a paper trail. I pulled the authorization documents through the bank's fraud inquiry portal. I looked at the signature. It was good she had practiced, or Troy had, but it wasn't mine. The pressure of my actual signature runs heavier on the downstroke of the V. This one was uniform. I could see the copy artifact on the notary seal, a faint doubling on the embossed edge that happens when you photograph a seal rather than press an original. Someone had photographed a legitimate document and composited a new one. It was convincing enough to pass a teller's review. It was not convincing to someone who does this professionally. I called the estate attorney, a man named Mr. Kellerman who had been handling my family's paperwork for 15 years. I told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Vivian, I'm going to need you to send me everything you just described, and I'm going to need you to not contact your sister yet." I agreed. Then I called my son. Jonah was at school, but he texted during lunch. I sent him a message that just said, "Something happened with Grandma's account. I'll explain tonight." He replied with a single word, "Already?" I didn't understand what he meant until that evening. I got home to find Jonah at the kitchen table with his laptop open and 2 screens running. He's 16. He codes the way other kids play video games, constantly, fluently, with a level of focus that has always made me a little in awe of him. His father was a software developer. Jonah got the instinct and then figured out the rest himself. He looked up when I came in. He said, "Sit down, Mum. I have to show you something." He turned one of the monitors toward me. 3 weeks earlier, before Mum had even passed, when she was in hospice and we all knew the timeline was short, Jonah had noticed something. He'd been helping me organize the estate files on the shared drive I maintained for attorney communication. He told me that while he was sorting folders, he saw that Renee had been in the drive, repeatedly, downloading documents. He checked the access log, which I had set to record all activity, and found that her account had accessed the estate agreement, the trust summary, and specifically the signature authorization forms 4 times in 2 weeks. He didn't tell me them because he didn't have proof of intent, but he started watching. When he saw the access pattern continue, Renee downloading the notarized signature pages specifically, repeatedly, he built what he described as a version of a canary trap. He created a duplicate folder structure on the drive that looked identical to the real one, with the same file names, the same layout, but the documents inside were modified. The wire transfer authorization form in the fake folder had an account number that routed to a monitored dummy account he'd set up through a fintech sandbox he uses for school projects. The real documents, he moved to a new location with a different access path, one Renee didn't have. He said, "I needed her to think she was getting the real files. I needed the real files to be somewhere else." I stared at my son for a long time. So when Renee used what she believed was the legitimate authorization form, she was working from Jonah's copy. The account number on her transfer request was not Mom's estate account, it was Jonah's dummy account. And the actual estate funds, the real $340,000, had never been accessible to her. The money she thought she'd stolen had never moved. What she had actually done was wire $340,000 of imaginary funds into a monitored account that generated an immediate flag report, which Jonah had set to forward automatically to a secure folder he shared with me. The real estate funds, Jonah explained, he had quietly flagged with the bank's fraud monitoring team 3 days before Mum passed. He'd found a provision in the account agreement that allowed a designated account holder to request a temporary transfer freeze pending estate review. He drafted the request, filled in my information, and asked me to sign it digitally. He told me it was a routine estate account maintenance form, and I had signed it without reading it carefully. He looked a little guilty about that part. Just a little. I sat back in my chair. "You forged a fraud freeze on your grandmother's estate account," I said. "I didn't forge anything," he said. "You signed it. You just didn't read it." I thought about being angry. I was not angry. The real money was safe. Renee had successfully stolen nothing. She just didn't know that yet. Mr. Kellerman, when I called him the next morning with Jonah's documentation, was the most quietly impressed I had ever heard a 63-year-old estate attorney be. He said, "Your son built a honeypot." I said, "Yes." He said, "How old is he?" I said, 16. There was a pause. He said, "Well, we filed the fraud complaint with the bank that day. We filed a police report in Cabarrus County. We filed a complaint with the North Carolina State Bar Notary Division regarding the forged seal. Mr. Kellerman contacted the Scottsdale field office of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit because the wire transfer crossed state lines, which made it federal." Then Mr. Kellerman said the same thing Jonah had said the night before. "Don't contact Renee. Let her enjoy the trip." She didn't know the money wasn't real. She was in Cancun. Troy had booked a suite at a resort that ran $1,100 a night. Jonah's monitoring flag showed her card, linked to the joint account she'd used for the transfer, was being run for charges. Restaurant, spa, excursion boat. Every transaction was processing because Jonah's dummy account had a small real balance he'd funded with $500 of his own savings, specifically so the card would appear functional for minor charges while the larger balance remained a ghost. He said, "I needed her to feel safe. If the card starts declining immediately, she panics and calls the bank and everything gets complicated. I want her comfortable." My son, 16 years old. On the fourth day, Renee called me. I was in the parking lot of a grocery store. I saw her name on my screen and I felt a very specific kind of cold, the kind that doesn't come from the weather. I answered. I made my voice sound hollow. She said, "Vivian, hey!" Like nothing. Like she hadn't just tried to steal everything our mother had left behind. I said, "Hey!" She asked how I was holding up. I said not great. She made sympathetic sounds. She said she was taking a little trip to clear her head after everything, that the grief had been so hard on her. I said I understood. She said she wanted to talk about the estate when she got back, that she thought maybe the process had been handled a little unfairly, and she just wanted to make sure everything was sorted out correctly. I let her talk. Then I said, "Yeah, I think you're right, that we need to sort it out. I found something kind of upsetting in the accounts this week." A pause. Very brief. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said. "Something looks off with the transfer authorization. I'm probably going to have to involve the attorney." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm sure it's nothing," she said. Her voice had changed slightly. Just slightly. "Probably," I said. "Enjoy your trip." I hung up and sat in the parking lot for a moment. Then I went inside and bought 2 bags of groceries, and I cooked dinner for Jonah, and we watched a movie, and I did not think about Renee for the rest of the night. She called back the next morning. Twice. I didn't answer. That afternoon, Jonah's monitoring system flagged a large transaction attempt at the resort. Troy had apparently decided to settle the full 4-night bill before checkout, a charge of just under $4,400. The transaction ran through the system, hit the actual balance ceiling Jonah had set, and declined. Jonah texted me, "It's happening." The resort apparently tried a second time, declined again, then a third on a different terminal, declined. From what Renee described later, in a voicemail she left me that I still have saved, Troy went to the front desk to dispute the decline and was informed by the manager that their card had been flagged by the issuing institution for suspicious activity, that a hold had been placed pending a fraud investigation, and that the outstanding balance would need to be settled by an alternate method before they could check out. Troy apparently did not have an alternate method that covered $4,500. Then Renee's phone started getting the bank notifications, not just the decline alerts, the fraud investigation notices. Her account had been frozen, all of it, including the dummy balance, including, as far as she could see, the $340,000 she believed she had successfully moved. She called me screaming. I answered this time. I could hear Troy in the background trying to explain something to a resort employee. Renee's voice was at a register I had not heard from her since we were teenagers, and she'd broken our mother's favorite lump and tried to blame me. "Vivian, what did you do? What did you do to my account? I don't know what you've done, but you need to fix this right now. We are stuck at this resort, and our card is..." I let her finish. Then I said, "Renee, I need you to listen to me very carefully." She went quiet. The authorization form you used to transfer funds from Mom's estate account was a document that Jonah created. It's a monitored dummy. The estate account was under a fraud freeze before Mom even passed. The money you transferred doesn't exist. You moved $340,000 of nothing into a honeypot account that has been logging every transaction and every access attempt for the past 3 weeks. Every piece of that is documented and has already been submitted to the bank's fraud division, to the Cabarrus County Sheriff, and to a federal financial crimes unit in Scottsdale. Silence. The real estate funds are intact. They are in a location you never had access to. You have been in Cancun for 4 days on $500 of my son's money. More silence. Then, very quietly, "You're lying." "I am not lying. And Renee, the notary seal on the authorization form you submitted was photographed from a document I sent you in December. That's document fraud. The wire transfer crossed state lines. That's federal wire fraud. Mr. Kellerman filed the complaints on Tuesday." I heard her breath catch. "Come home," I said, "and come home with an attorney." I hung up. She and Troy flew back 2 days later. There was a brief surreal period of about a week where Renee called me every single day trying to negotiate, first with denial, then with apologies, then with accusations that I had set her up, which I suppose was not entirely wrong. She called our aunt in Raleigh and told her I have manipulated the estate documents. Our aunt called me, heard the actual story, and did not call Renee back. Troy apparently had not known the full scope of what Renee had done. That was his story anyway. He moved out of their shared apartment in Scottsdale within 2 weeks of their return, which told me something about the quality of that relationship. Renee hired an attorney. Her attorney called Mr. Kellerman. Mr. Kellerman, from what he told me afterward, described the call as brief. The federal wire fraud investigation resulted in a formal criminal referral. Renee ultimately pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of document fraud. As part of the plea agreement, which her attorney negotiated hard for, she agreed to full restitution of the estate funds, a fine, and 3 years of supervised probation. She avoided prison, which I was told was a favorable outcome given the documentation. I did not advocate for leniency. I did not advocate for harshness. I told Mr. Kellerman that whatever the law provided was sufficient. He said that was a reasonable position. The estate settled 4 months after Mum's passing. After all fees and the return of my $47,000 in personal contributions, Renee and I were each entitled to approximately $140,000. Because of the plea agreement, her share was held in a supervised account and dispersed gradually against her restitution obligations. Mine was released in full. I used some of it to pay off the last of Mom's medical debt. I put a portion in an account for Jonah's college. I kept the rest. Renee has not contacted me since the plea was entered. I have not contacted her. I don't have plans to. What I think about when I let myself is the version of this where Jonah hadn't been paying attention, where he hadn't noticed the access logs, where I had not, apparently by accident, signed a fraud freeze form because my 16-year-old son handed it to me and told me it was routine maintenance. I think about how completely I would have lost the money, the house proceeds, the years of my own contributions. I had trusted the system I built. I had not considered that someone would study that system carefully enough to find a gap. I also think about the fact that Renee had been planning this while our mother was still alive, while Mum was in hospice, while I was driving to Concord twice a week to sit with her, to make sure the aid was there, to hold her hand through the nights that were hard. Renee was in Scottsdale downloading signature pages. I don't say that to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because I think it's important to know what you're actually dealing with. Some people grieve. Some people calculate. And sometimes you don't find out which kind you're related to until the worst moment of your life. Jonah graduated from high school last month. He's been accepted to Carnegie Mellon for computer science. He starts in the fall. I am so unspeakably proud of him that I sometimes can't find the right words, which is unusual for me. I am generally a woman who can find the right words for most things. At his graduation dinner, just the two of us at his favorite restaurant in Charlotte, I told him that what he did, the foresight, the patience, the technical precision of it, had protected not just the money but something harder to name, the thing that would have happened to me if I had lost everything in the week after losing my mother. He nodded and cut into a steak and said, "I know, Mum. That's why I did it." He said, "You always said the numbers don't lie. I just made sure she was reading the wrong numbers." I have spent my entire career following money that people thought they'd hidden. I have testified in court. I have traced funds through 3 layers of shell accounts in 2 countries. I know better than most people that there is always a trail, and the trail always goes somewhere. What I didn't know was that sometimes the trail you follow isn't the real one. Sometimes someone who loves you builds a decoy, and they do it so quietly and so carefully that you don't even know you needed saving until the moment is already over. I learned the hard way that blood is not a contract, love is not an assumption, and the people who will actually stand in the fire for you, sometimes they're right there at the kitchen table waiting for you to come home. If you've ever had to cut someone off to protect what actually matters, leave a red heart below. Like and subscribe for more stories like this one. I keep coming back to the timing of it. Renee was downloading those signature files while my mother was still breathing. While I was driving to Concord twice a week, sitting in that hospice room, holding Mum's hand through the nights that scared me most. My sister was in Scottsdale studying my paperwork, figuring out which pages she needed. That's the part I can't fully put down, not the money, the timing. What I've come to understand, slowly and without any comfort at first, is that actions like hers don't come from nowhere. They come from a long pattern of choosing the easy thing, the convenient thing, the thing that costs you nothing. Renee had been making that choice her whole life, letting me carry the weight, showing up only when it looked good, treating my effort like a resource she was entitled to draw from. Every time that was allowed to continue without consequence, it grew. What started as a sister who didn't call enough became a sister who forged a notary seal on the week of her mother's burial. The consequences, when they finally arrived, were exactly proportional to the years of choices that had built up to that moment. I don't think Renee is a monster. I think she is someone who never had to develop the part of herself that considers other people. And when that part never grows, you end up capable of things you might not have believed of yourself at 22 or 30. Character isn't fixed. It either gets stronger with use or it quietly deteriorates. Hers had been deteriorating for a long time, and I had been too busy carrying my own weight to notice how far it had gone. Jonah is the other side of that equation. What he did wasn't just clever, it was patient. He noticed something quietly, said nothing, and built a solution over weeks without anyone asking him to. He used what he knew. He thought 3 steps ahead of someone who thought she was being clever. And he did all of it because he understood, at 16, that protecting someone you love is not a passive thing. It requires you to actually pay attention, to show up even when nothing is wrong yet, to build the fence before the horse gets out. I think about what it means to raise a person like that. I didn't teach him the specific skills he used. His father gave him the foundation for that, and Jonah built the rest himself out of pure curiosity and discipline. But somewhere in our years of just the two of us, of me working long hours and him figuring things out independently, and us eating dinner together and talking about problems like they were puzzles worth solving, somewhere in all of that, he learned that difficulty is not a reason to give up. It's a reason to think harder. That's the thing I want to hold on to. Not the betrayal, not the legal outcome, not even the vindication of watching everything Renee thought she'd won dissolve in a resort lobby in Cancun. What I want to hold on to is the image of my son at the kitchen table, screens glowing, quiet and sure, building something that would protect me before I even knew I needed protecting. He learned that from somewhere. I like to think some of it came from watching me work through things that were hard and unfair and exhausting without deciding the answer was to take from someone else. That how you behave when things are difficult is exactly who you are. I don't carry what happened with Renee as grief anymore. I carry it as clarity. Some people will always choose themselves at your expense, and recognizing that is not bitterness, it's information. The most honest thing you can do with that information is act on it, protect what matters, and build your real life with the people who are actually there. Jonah is leaving for Pittsburgh in the fall. The house is going to be very quiet. I think I'm going to be okay with that.